All right, thanks for joining. I'm Aaron Kennedy. I'm with Cognition360. Here with me today, I've got James Davis from Pax8. Thanks for joining us, James.
Thanks, Aaron. I'm looking forward to this session and getting stuff started and helping more people learn about data and metrics and how to tie it into their day-to-day roles
Yep,
and make it better.
yep. So this will be just a conversational webinar. We don't have like a slide deck or anything like that to go through. We're really just kind of talking shop. One of my favorite things to do. So James, you're the director of Pax8 Academy for A and Z. Hope I said that right. Um,
Yep, got
that's
it.
your new role, right? How long has that been your new title?
Since the
6 months?
start of May, so
Oh,
it's not even
yeah,
that
okay.
long.
Not that
It's
long.
yeah, well, 2 months now. There's two
2
months
months.
to the day.
Okay, yeah. Can't keep
Um,
up with time anymore. COVID brain.
I reckon it's already July. How, how
Oh,
scary
that's
is
right.
that?
Oh, it's not July here. So uh we're still closing out the quarter. um well, cool. Well, I want to talk about some service metrics and just kind of get your thoughts on what 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 are the right service metrics to look at, KPIs, whatever term you guys want to use. But there's depending on who you talk to, I've seen articles about the 340 service metrics that you should be looking at. And it's just kind of like, I mean, that just alone is comical. And how would you even start to look at that? Even if you had a full team just constantly looking at it. But I know, all our service managers out there, it's not like they have all this time in the day to just sit there and thumb through data and build reports and all that kind of stuff. So which metrics and do you usually recommend to kind of get started with, and how do you kind of break that up?
So I think I'll start with the breaking it up point because I think it's really important to understand the differences because everyone treats all metrics and KPIs the same.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
think,
that's
and
a good
that's where
point.
we start going wrong because you know you've probably come across this as well, where you go to an MSP and they'll show you their bright gauge dashboards or what they've got in Cognition 360 or
Mm-hmm.
whatever other systems they've built cobbled together themselves. With this dashboard that they share in the office. I have like 30, 40 metrics for the team to work to.
Right.
So what's important is to understand there's a couple of key different ones. There's metrics that are showing like health, what I would call health indicators of service,
Mm-hmm.
and those would be things like number of tickets open, now kill rate, those sort of basic ones that most people have. There's leading indicators that are going to tell us what is going to happen, and pick something for professional services like number of quotes approved. That's going to tell us how much labour is going to come in that we need to deliver.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, and you've got then behavioural things to manage people by, which is more the KPI component of, um, say, for example, like number of time, number of hours entered today, as
Mm-hmm.
an example, or number of tickets open that have no schedule. Things like those behavioural things to make sure actions are happening that we keep the service health.
Right.
If you mash them all up, which we all do, and have it on one big board, then who's actually responsible for them, and what are the levers to pull?
Yeah.
If everyone's responsible, then no one is. Um,
That's right.
so, having that sort of high level understanding first to be able to think about it, that helps to break it down for that sort of dashboarding component and that management. But then what, like from there, then there's analytical type data and analytical type metrics to help you make decisions, to make changes and improvements. And
Mm-hmm.
that you typically can't do that on a standard dashboard. It's
Yeah,
your
the
bright
dashboarding
gauge is an
tool
example.
is one of those, like, I especially at Cognition, I hear a lot of people trying to make a dashboarding tool something that it's not, where they're trying to look at trends or analytics or forecasting and things like that. And dashboarding is really just like a point in time of this is what it is. It's very a what kind of metric. It doesn't really give you the why. A lot of times it doesn't even give you a, I don't know, what is good or how do you define good? So it might say like 15. So you got 15 open tickets. Okay, so what does that mean? So then what do you do with that information? And that's where you got to get into a deeper dive in the analytics, and really just saying like, oh, 15 is 3 times higher than our average right now. So hey, we need all hands on deck to figure out what's going on, things like that. So it's really just kind of like making sure. To me, is when you're going to pick any metric, figure out, no matter where you get that metric from, meaning like somebody told me this is the most important metric to look at. What is good out in the general MSP world? And then like, what is good for us? Like where should we start? Because I think a lot of people, when they start measuring, they start with, my kill rate, I was told at a conference needs to be this. And so if it's not that, then I want it to send out an alert. And so then it's just alerting everybody all the time. And then it's like, well, this doesn't work. We're getting rid of that. So then they just give up quickly, instead of like, hey, just measure what you've got today. And then you can start moving it and getting it, better each day or week or whatever your cadence is.
I think that's a really good point we tend to copy what everyone else is doing because we start off at that point of we're not sure what we should be measuring. So our go-to is our community, and you'll see on the forums or in peer groups or at the events, everyone will ask and say, what should I measure? And just take it at face value of, well, these are the numbers to start with.
Mm-hmm.
Whether right or wrong, like that's not too bad. But what your point there about is like the levers and understanding what makes up that number is really the most important part of this journey. Because if we just have a number on a dashboard, whether it's the valid number to have there or not, if no one knows how to affect that number, what that number means to the business or the service flow or clients, there's no sort of purpose to it. It's just a number on a screen.
Yeah, exactly.
And open tickets is a really good one. It can either serve a really good purpose or it's just a number.
Right.
If you've got no analytics behind it, saying you have like 100 tickets open is meaningless.
Right.
Well, we've got 100 tickets.
Yeah.
How many people do you have? How many endpoints do you support? What are the complexity of the tickets?
You got 5 techs, 100 tickets might be, scary, but you got 200 techs. That's pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, and like those kill rates as well. Like, again, how many techs do we have? What's our capacity? What's our utilization? All those sort of. There's a lot more behind what goes to these. And what this being a good starting point of open tickets is a really important metric to show service health. So what we need to do is understand, like you said before, is understand the trends of where does it typically sit.
Yep.
Because if we just get a number now, it'll be 400 now. It might have been 100 in the past. It might have been 800 in the past.
Yeah.
So we need to get that longer term trend, and then understand what behaviors we've got in place as a starting point, like what's actually driving the number for that, and then start to look at setting shorter term goals to reduce it.
Right.
And then that starts to help you drive initiatives of what do we think would help reduce that number. What's our resourcing? Does it make sense? For, like you just said, 100 tickets, we might not be able to get through 100 tickets with a team of 5.
Right.
But then we need to tie in the financials from there as well. Like, are we profitable to get those numbers down, or are we not charging enough to be able to manage those tickets in a reasonable amount of time as well? It can get super complicated with this kind of stuff, but that's actually a good thing because that's what helps us learn, actually drive the business behavior.
Yeah, it just makes you think about like why does that metric matter, and how is that metric made up, and then if I'm thinking about just making that metric better, just that practice alone, forget what the metric is, that practice alone is going to just make you better as a service manager, and because it makes service to the customer overall better.
100%.
So, you and I talked before about you're stepping into an MSP and taking a look at them. What are some of those first metrics that you might look at in terms of just kind of gauging, hey, what's the maturity of this MSP, or what's the health, I guess, maybe of the service delivery and that kind of stuff? What are a couple of those metrics you tend to look at?
So when I go and look at service board, I'm looking for number of open tickets,
Mm-hmm.
number of techs, number of endpoints managed,
Yep.
and how many tickets are above 7 days old.
Above 7 days old. So for those other ones, are you looking at kind of a ratio of, so what would be,
Yeah.
what would be kind of a healthy, you would say, open tickets to open techs, or
So
number of
t
techs?
typical. This is a really rough average, and like you said before, there's more context to this. So don't just run it and use my number that I'm saying that's gospel. This is just like a base average that would work from as a coaching perspective. So
Mm-hmm.
typically, an average tech can work through about 10 tickets a day.
Yeah.
So some will do more, some will do less.
Right.
It depends on their level, but just a rough average of a typical day can be about 10 tickets.
Mm-hmm.
So that's your capacity.
Yeah. And
So
then the other thing that I would say about that is there's also the type of tech that you might have. I mean, obviously there's the level one, level two, level
yep,
three, and usually you want your level one to do a higher number of tickets,
yep,
whereas your level three might, 2, 3 tickets a day. But there's also some people that like field service technicians. They're only going on site. They might only knock out 2 or 3 tickets a day because one ticket might be a visit or something like that. Whereas somebody remote, they're taking calls, jumping through emails, doing that kind of thing. They're going to be higher, but on average, and this is what I think you're saying, just a rough feel, like let me get a feel without digging deep into the data. About 10 tickets per day per tech. So if I've
yep.
got 10 technicians and I've got 100 open tickets, in theory, that should take me how long to kind of get that, not counting the obviously incoming tickets. Um, what is that?
Yes. So that's a
One
day.
day? Yeah.
That would be one day. So
So one day of, assuming we just shut off the pipe and no more tickets are
yep.
coming in, we're all done with those on average. So you would think would that be healthy?
that
100
that
tickets?
that would that would be fairly healthy at that sort of size, like making
Yeah.
these simple numbers of like 10 techs, 100
Right.
tickets. Assuming we're getting in roughly 100 tickets a day,
Yeah.
which again, very simple numbers, then you would stay fairly healthy because not every ticket's going to be closed that day. So you would be able to keep your kill rate around um, that sort of around that 100% because you have that roller coaster of some days it'd be like in the 80s and 90s, and then some
Right.
days it'd be like the 100 to 120%.
Right.
So
And that is what I would call kind of a top level or first level metric that you're kind of looking at. And then it's kind of, oh, let's kind of dig into that a little bit further. Cause like at Cognition360, one of the things that we do is we talk about what are the types of tickets and what on average do those individual types. And this isn't something that you want to start out with, of course. Um, and in fact, if you jump into that kind of deeper second level, third level metric, it can quickly become like overwhelming where you just kind of back away and get afraid of the data. And then you're just, well, let me just wing it, which is obviously not what you want to do. But things like, hey, how long does it take us to close desktop install tickets or whatever? And then looking at all of the workload and getting a better understanding of, hey, it's going to take us 3.2 days to close tickets. And then you're factoring in your inbound rate on top of that. So obviously, like you were saying, it can get complex really quickly. But going through that practice and starting at the beginning, like we are talking about, and kind of digging further into it, you start with the main. Hey, let's just kind of get our bearings, and then just you're fine tuning things, just constantly doing that.
and it should be a never ending journey with this as well. So like
Mm-hmm.
we've started with that sort of really high level of number of tickets open currently, number of techs, and then how that volume of coming in per day.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I look at the how many tickets are above 7 days old is because it tells me how efficient the processes are of the maturity of the client. So to give you again another like rough number that we should look for, a healthy service desk would typically run with 10 to 20% of overall tickets with above 7 days old, because there's legitimate reasons that tickets get above a certain age.
Mm-hmm.
So, think simple things of like a client's lodged a ticket ahead of time to create a new user in 3 weeks. That would be
Right.
normal. But
Right.
things like that happen, or we have to wait on a third party, or if we have to wait on the client because they've gone on holidays, like very legitimate things. But if you're above that 10 to 20%, usually that says the techs aren't really following up and
Yeah.
aren't managing to the close. So we
Right.
get a lot of clogged tickets in the system.
Yeah.
So that 10 tickets a day, if we're getting that 100 in a day, if we've got 100 sitting there and the majority are over 7 days old, that's going to clog up their ability to actually work on the new things and get it closed. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where we cycle and get that bad kill rate, because we've got rubbish there that's not actually being driven to closure.
Right.
And that sort of health indicator then flows into the mechanisms and the functions of the service flow of like how we triaging tickets, how we're prioritizing, how we allocating and dispatching, then how are we working on them, and how we then doing the closure process. Um,
I love that
that
stuff that you're talking about there, because I've mentally been through that as well. Back at my own MSP, when it's one of those like, let me just kind of start with this, and then you just start peeling. I mean, it's just like the onion analogy, where it's just like you keep peeling back, and they're like, well, how are we doing triage, and are we measuring that at all? Oh, we don't have anybody doing triage in this service board, and then it's now we need to pull so like it's just you just keep going, and just one simple metric can make you do that kind of stuff, where just you just constantly are uncovering things over and over.
and that I think that's the fun part of the journey too. Is
Mm-hmm.
um, so if you either if you're a service manager or if you're an owner listening to this and like the service manager doesn't enjoy that kind of stuff, they're probably not the right fit to be the service manager.
Right.
Like, brutally honest,
Yeah, that's true.
this is one of those important parts of being the service manager is not just managing the people or dealing with the tech.
Right.
It's actually being able to grab this data and implement new and better processes
Mm-hmm.
into the service delivery department.
Yep.
Um, it, you're not going to do that on gut feel. Um, it's very it's very rare I come across people that just sort of get it naturally and don't need the sort of data to prove it or understand what's happening.
Right.
It's a bit of a unicorn. Most
Well,
people
yeah, and
need
even if you
the
do have that skill set, um, at scale, it just becomes impossible. Like,
yeah.
okay, that maybe you could just wing it and have good service at 20 people, because you're seeing every ticket come in and that kind of thing. I remember at my MSP, when we were growing, we grew it from like 30 to, I think we had about 70 people at the end. Um, at the beginning, like I was getting a notice every time a ticket was closed and opened. And then at some point, I was just like, this is just noise at this point. There's no way I could possibly keep track of all this stuff, much less remember or whatever. And then it just became where, okay, I still need to have a handle on this, but I just can't be involved in every single little thing. So that's when it was like, well, which metrics do we look at, and building? This is pre Bright Gauge and all that kind of stuff, though. But um,
The old Excel spreadsheets and
yep, it's exactly
pivot
what I was.
tables.
Hit the export button from ConnectWise and play around with it, and then do it again and do it again and do it again.
That's, that's how I learn a lot of this stuff as well. Like this is our old man wisdom coming through. Of wouldn't it have been nice to have all these tools back in the day?
Oh man, it's been so great, so great.
But it, so, like, just following on from the other one that I said around the overall endpoints that we're managing.
Hmm.
So, if we've a typical average MSP, I can tell from profitability of the service department for service gross margin based on the number of techs they've got and the number of endpoints they manage.
Yep.
So if you're a average MSP that's horizontal, dealing with the typical complexity of an average small business, which isn't very high, you should be at least having managing 300 endpoints to one tech.
300
That's the
endpoints to one tech. Yeah.
that's the base sort of minimum because typically, again, very rough numbers, an average endpoint will generate half a ticket a month
So
if
here's
you're
a
managed as
question
an
for you.
environment.
And I know this is it's not that new now, but endpoint, does that mean a computer or does it mean a user? How do you kind of differentiate? Because a lot of people are wanting to, if they haven't already, move to that per user pricing and that kind of stuff. So would you still say the same thing? 300 users for every tech?
I I'm still a little bit old school, but really
Hmm.
most MSPs still operate this way, even if they charge per user.
Yeah, they do.
Um, so it's still really the server, laptop, desktop
Hmm.
as an endpoint. Um, so that half a ticket per endpoint often works out from the average MSP.
Right.
If it's much higher, that's where you can start investigating why we're generating so many more tickets from that.
Hmm.
What sort of type, going back to what you've said before, what sort of types are there? Are we doing a lot more change than incidents? Are we doing more complex? Is it because the environments are old and not set up, configured well?
Right.
Those kinds of things. So if you're under that sort of 300 threshold, you're either like working in really complex environments and charging those premium prices for it,
Hmm.
and that's perfectly fine. If you're an average MSP, if you're 200, you're probably at that sort of 40% service gross margin in for the service delivery.
Yep.
Or if you're down around the hundreds, you'll be in the 30s.
Yep.
It's it's very rough, but this is that gut feel experience of seeing hundreds of MSPs and the numbers sort of lining up that way.
Right.
Um, so if you don't have that sort of number, it's not a go and rush and sack everyone straight away. It's a go and investigate what the problems are. Again,
Hmm.
let's peel back the onion. Are we not charging enough? Is that just our problem? We're not charging enough for that to line up.
Yep.
Do we have bad environments that we need to sell more projects and get them up to date? Do we Are we super inefficient in the way that we actually support them? We've got more text because we don't have enough documentation. We don't utilize enough automation and systems for
You used a
it.
couple words there, which I see and hear service managers kind of shy away from: gross profitability, service margin. Um, and I think a lot of service managers, they probably came from the engineering side. So they were really good at,
Yeah,
working tickets and probably good with customers, things like that. Um, but they shy away from, oh, that's something for the financial people or the bean counters and that kind of thing. Um, and to me, that's always one of the easiest ways to figure out all these other metrics, like kill rate and all those kind of stuff. If those are all doing fairly well, then the service margin will be doing well. So that's one of the easiest ways to look at that from this is where we start. And this is probably a conversation that we could fill up a whole series of books about. But starting there, and then those bleed from it. Well, if we're not profitable in this, line of service, why is that? Then you jump into your number of tickets, kill rate, whatever that may be. But to me, that's one of the easiest ones. If we're taking all the levers, then that should be right. And if you kind of say it in a way or think about it, I guess, in a different way, then I mean, of course it makes sense. If we're delivering good service, we should be making money as a company. So nobody would argue with that. But for some reason, service managers tend to shy away from that. Like, I don't really want to get involved, and you just kind of tell me which customer to make happy, and I'll make that one happy. And what I see often on the cognition side, when we're actually looking at the data, is you tend to over service just the higher dollar amount ones.
Yeah.
And so then that becomes, everybody drop everything because Acme company put in a ticket and they pay us 20,000 a month. And then you go look at the service profitability of that client and it's, 5% or something ridiculous. And it's like, you should either resize this customer or get rid of them.
I- It's it is a very important factor, the financial aspect, and I think I think you've touched on a really good point of like engineers shy away from the service managers shy away from it because they've come from an engineering, the
Mm-hmm.
tech background that they don't really want to deal with money. It's the sort of that personality. It's a bit of conflict sometimes, billing and things.
Yep.
But it's also the owners a lot of the time don't empower and share that visibility
That's a
with
good
the
point.
service manager either.
Yep.
And a lot of that comes from the owner not really understanding service gross margin,
Mm-hmm.
um, and a fear that either putting the pressure of financials on the service manager won't help them like actually succeed at the
Right.
role,
Yeah, that's a good point.
or they're worried about just exposing the numbers because they either don't know them well enough to train them,
Mm-hmm.
or they just don't. They're too fearful of showing the financials in the first place.
Right.
Often because maybe we're not performing that well. But that's exactly the time that we need to share this information so someone has the context,
Yep.
because it's very easy for a service manager without that financial context, which we both agree is like the single most important
Mm-hmm.
component. If we don't have that context, the decisions you make are very different. And you made that point around like the large client and over servicing.
Mm-hmm.
So that happens over and over again because no one's actually sitting there going, "Well, are we even making any money on this?"
Exactly. Exactly.
Um,
So there's a lot to bite off on there. We're going to go and
yeah,
wrap up on this session, but let's pick up on that on the next time because I
yeah,
think there's a lot to kind of peel back on that one, and we can talk some more. So if you want to reach out to either one of us, you can reach out to James at clevelops.com, or you can reach out to me, Aaron, Aaron, at Cognition360.com. So that's all we got for today. James, thanks for joining me. I appreciate
thanks,
it.
Aaron.
Always love talking with you, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Sounds great.
All right. See ya.